Good morning everyone. I'm Cecilia Fialho, Nuffield International Scholar, and today I'll be here presenting the results of my report, my research, which consisted in building a model of comparative analysis of regulatory framework in different countries regarding the adoption of genetically modified organisms, GMOs. First, I'd like to thank Nuffield for this opportunity. It's an honor to be here attending the Nuffield National Conference. I'd like to also thank all who made it possible for me here to be here today, presenting my findings, especially my sponsor, TIACREF, the first company to believe and to make it possible for a researcher from Latin America to join this extraordinary network. I believe that being here is just one of the evidences that Nuffield really builds a legacy that has no borders, especially continental ones, so thank you. A little about myself. I live in Uberlândia, which is southeastern part of Brazil, about 600 kilometers of São Paulo, 700,000 people. I'm an economist and an analyst at Céleres, an agribusiness intelligence consultancy. I'm responsible for projections of supply and demand of agricultural commodities, value chain analysis, and I'm part of a team studying the behavior of biotechnology, agricultural biotechnology in Latin America. Nuffield and TIACREF brought me the opportunity to expand this same research to any country. So I decided, as objective of my study, to analyze the legal position of transgenics in Brazil, China, United States, and European Union. I wanted to select 4 examples that crossed 2 variables. One would be the position on GMOs, favor or against, and the other, the socioeconomic development of the country. So why these 4? Because they produce now and will produce for the next 10 years 70% of world's animal protein at about 72–74% of grain production, especially soybean, corn, and cotton. 2015, when I started to develop my research, marked 20 years of commercialization of transgenic events in the world, and I believe that the time is right to seek to understand how biotechnology is perceived by our government, our people, and these 4 countries have very different stories regarding biotechnology in agriculture. In a brief background of the selected countries, as crossing the 2 variables I just mentioned, Brazil and the United States assume today the lead production in GMOs. Brazil grows about 45 million hectares of transgenic crops, while the US account for 40% of the world total. The EU are very resistant. They grow about 117,000 hectares of GM corn, which was approved many years ago, and mainly in Spain, Portugal, and China currently only accepts 1 variety of GM cotton and grows about 7,000 hectares of transgenic papaya in the Guangdong province. So the country, which for many years has undergone a very serious infestation in cotton production, was able to reduce the consumption of pesticides by more than 60% between 1994 and 2014. So for my research, I interviewed several agribusiness professionals, from farmers to lawmakers, to understand what are their perception and what do they understand, what do they perceive as biotechnology in agriculture. And I chosen 4 macro themes that I think that are the most critical to the understanding of this legal approach. Would be top-bottom, historical aspects, the acceptance of the technology by different social spheres, institutional, structure and competence of bodies, number of approved events, and time for approval. Regulatory would be the system as a whole, from the creation of the law to protectionism of varieties. And technical, which is the efficiency and technical competence of all involved in the process. Each macro team had 5 criteria that got grades from 1 to 5, here, which are in the right part of the table. And 1 illustrates high risk to the country, 5 would be the highest grade. I know you can read the criteria, it's very detailed in my report, but I just wanted to show you that with this table and the model I built, you have a model, you have access to a model that can rank any country and to evaluate your own legal basis if you want to. So on a scale to from 1 to 100, we have the following rank, with Brazil reaching the best grades on sophistication of its framework when approving GMOs, followed by the US, which I thought at the beginning would be the first position, China in third, and the EU in the fourth position. On the right, we have the same information but distributed by criteria, which allow us to observe what were the most attended macro themes and the ones who were less. On the rated chart, the closer to the outside line, the closer to an optimal grade, so Brazil stands out as a very structured and efficient framework. A dual situation, though, was observed in the country. All the responsibility for decisions regarding the approval of any new agricultural product lies on a single institution in Brazil, which is CETN-Bio, and that has worked to streamline the process, but can also mean a weak point to the country. And what I mean by that, in recent years, agriculture has proven to be one of the only sectors of the Brazilian economy to close a trade balance year with surplus results. So public finances are very dependent on exports. This exposure to the international market and demand for CETN-Bio to act accordingly reflects its weakness. A good news is that in a time of political and economic instability in Brazil, the body has approved only in 2015 20 new transgenic events, an absolute record for the country, including there a vaccine to fight dengue infection, a disease that has reached more than 1.5 million Brazilians in 1 year. I know this is not common here in Australia, but it's a big deal in Brazil. And this opens important precedents for research into genetic mutation in animals, inserting Brazil in a very specific group that has invested in animal biotechnology recently. In 1997, the introduction of the first transgenic cotton with Bt gene contributed significantly to reverse the pest attack I mentioned at the beginning in China, bringing yield levels much higher than before the outbreak. Since then, however, the discussion on food safety gained a new momentum in the country, with the government aware that new crises could seriously affect the national production, and not only in cotton, but in crops directly related to food production. So this is one of the big reasons why China gives priority to the development of national GMO products. So since 2008, they have invested resources at around $4 billion in genetic R&D, building one of the most complete research centers in biotechnology in the world. That was very impressive to see in the country. They haven't found yet, however, a balance between international collaboration and a strong protectionism around its patents. Therefore, they have a very poor institutional performance with low diversity of GMOs approved for cultivation. In addition, the government fails in the role of advertising/communicating its population of 1.4 billion people of what are transgenics and what are the implications and risks that GM products can bring when consumed. I realize that there is little understanding on the subject, despite the fact that people have full confidence, over 90% in the scientific community. The United States, which are technically tied with Brazil, were a very particular case study. The country has the most comprehensive and traditional framework in the world. 3 agencies, which are USDA/APHIS, EPA, and FDA, take care of different aspects regarding the security guarantee of GM products. a robust, well-structured system with the best patent protection laws in the world. However, that is a landmark that became over time very complex and bureaucratic. Today, it is estimated that a GM event requires resources around $100 and $140 million to be released, and no less than 10 years to make it happen. We build the monsters ourselves, quoting Dr. Barbara Glenn from NASDA. That summed up pretty well the country's situation. So with this, American model became exclusive to, one, certain crops, since investments of this greatness are only justifiable in terms of risk assumed to crops with a significant area of coverage, and two, certain companies, considering also the investment required in the launch of a single GM product. The European Union has, in theory, one of the simplest approval systems of GMOs of the 4 countries. A system, however, that cannot converge the different positions of its different nations, and therefore it doesn't work properly. Our responsibility for defining the approval of GMOs rests with the European Commission. EFSA, the central body of the European framework, has authorized almost all proposals of GM products with scientific arguments on safety, but the concern of its population goes far beyond scientific certification, and I'm speaking here of political, ideological motivations. Farmers who see no reason for the intervention of transgenic if they are happy with their production. This inflexibility in the law to glimpse different arguments reflected in lower grades in the institutional aspect, as in the regulatory and the technical ones. In addition, the popular rejection, considerably stronger in countries that are opposed to GMOs, also penalized the historical macro theme, leading the European Union, therefore, to the 4th position in sophistication level of its framework approving GMOs. So, what to expect from the future? What the future holds then? I think the beauty of this industry is in its dynamism. The grades presented here were certainly not the same as 10 years ago, maybe 5, and there is much to change in the future too. And that was a conclusive discussion of my report. I asked all the agents interviewed what to expect from the use of biotechnology in the future. And I do not speak here specifically about products, but what to expect from biotechnological innovations and other innovations in the coming years. So for Brazil and the US, we can expect the rise of CRISPR, a technology that has come to allow genome editing with properties similar to biotechnology, but without the addition of a foreign gene. So scientists can achieve results similar to those of transgenic, but manipulating the string of a single agent itself. This means that products originating with this technique potentially go through a more streamlined process than the one that evaluates GMOs. Also for Brazil, we can expect greater participation of public authorities in GM R&D. In 2015, we had the launch of the first transgenic bean in the country, which was developed entirely by Embrapa, R&D company from the government. In China, a possible release of national transgenic varieties, which can dramatically change how the country interacts in the global agribusiness trading. Endorsing this, being the 2nd largest corn consumer in the world, China is beginning to unlock domestic prices for corn, letting it become volatile with the market, leaving behind a minimal storage strategy that's been on for almost a decade. This is a very important concept regarding food security for them. It's not about closing the best deals in global trading anymore, but being able to partially sustain the internal demand with internal production and to export as well, why not? So the purchase of Syngenta by ChemChina recently and the desire for the country to become internationally competitive shows that this is already happening. Market agents are starting to speculate the real chance of China exporting part of its corn stock and production, especially when considering that major corn importers like South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan are in the same continent, so that's a geographic advantage to China. In the US, we will have the impact of Act 120 that requires that products containing GM material have to be labeled, generating an even more alarming sense on the population of what are GMOs and why they must be labeled. As in Brazil, we can expect major advances in genome editing, significant investments in data science, and at last, a huge reform of the evaluation process to adopt transgenics in America. Recently, the White House administration declared that it would update the way the government regulates genetically modified crops and other biotech products. They claim that the present assessment is nearly 30 years old, and it has become obsolete and confusing, besides not fostering public confidence. It is clear to the US government that the country's attitude towards biotechnology can generate only two possible outcomes. The first will be the regulatory agencies simplify the approval process of GMOs and biotechnology research gains new breadth. This means accessibility. This means that new market players will be able to invest in biotechnology research, or agencies in the interest of absolute security validate the complexity of the approval process, the current one. And biotechnology will continue to progress, but in the background, making room for companies to focus energy and resources on technologies with greater potential return. In the EU, there's the Horizon 2020, a project that is already in vogue in the bloc, which aims to develop techniques to strengthen the European competitiveness in the international market, and biotechnologies is one of the factors analyzed, not only in agriculture but in other sectors also. It is believed that gradually there can be indeed a paradigm shift if consumers start to identify benefits of using biotechnology in other areas rather than agriculture, and finally considering it for food production. So in practical terms, why this information is important, why does it matter? First, biosecurity. Farmers in any country need to know what are the legal procedures to have products, GM or not, approved in their country. It is also important to understand what is being done in the public sphere to ensure our safety as farmers and as consumers, and it's the regulatory framework that's responsible for it that provides this information. In addition, farmers should question why some countries have access to better resources than others, better protection laws, etc. And this is not only related to socioeconomic circumstances, but to the way the country deals with the adoption of new technologies. What are the turning points of the law that rules your country? How does this affect your production? Being in favor or against being a farmer, a citizen, or a company, we must be aware of how our framework covers biotechnology and any other technology that comes to the market. We are decision-making agents in this process, and it's absolutely necessary that we take this position. So I appreciate your time. Once again, it's an honor to be here sharing my results with you. I apologize for my English. I hope I have contributed just a little on your understanding of the subject, and I'm open for questions and suggestions. So thank you.